Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. Scaling user acquisition has become harder to justify and even harder to predict. App teams are under pressure to grow faster while proving with zero data that every dollar spent delivers meaningful results beyond the install. In this episode, we're sharing an App Talk interview where David Murphy speaks with Lee Aho, Chief Revenue Officer at Perform CPE. Lee explains how outcome-based user acquisition models help brands move past service-level metrics like CPI and focus instead on the downstream events that actually define quality. From registrations and deposits to trades, dangers, and long-term value. Without further ado, here's the conversation with Lee Aho, Chief Revenue Officer at Perform CPE.
Hi, I'm David Murphy at Business of Apps, and I'm talking today with Lee Aho, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Perform CPE. Lee, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. So, Lee, I always like to kick off with a quick intro to the company, if you could, please.
Sure. So, David, Perform CPE drives new user acquisition on an outcome-based model where our marketers or brands are only paying us for net new users. So when we execute these user acquisition strategies for brands, we're centering all of our optimization techniques around the events or outcomes that our brands are telling us are their leading indicators for quality. So in the mobile space, beyond the point of that installation, that could be anything from a account registration to a linked bank account to a first-time deposit or first-time wager, first-time trade, whatever is the North Star of quality for those brands, that's what we're going to center around from an optimization perspective. And David, because we can do this at such scale across hundreds of brands and ingest those down funnel signals, we're really able to execute user acquisition in a way that's far more predictable and less experimental. Because I think for a lot of your listeners, just like the brands that we talk to on a day-to-day basis, they're being asked to do something that is challenging. They're asked to grow user acquisition in ways that are faster, more scalable, and they're really being tasked to defend every dollar of that spend. So our role at Perform CPE is to deliver the measurable UA results, and then we can tie all of that acquisition spend directly back to what matters most for those brands.
Makes sense. So when we talk about performance, Lee, marketers are often weighing CPI against CPE. How should they decide what's right for their goals?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we get asked frequently, because CPI and CPE on the surface can sound like competing approaches, but really they're just different commercial models. And where some brands can get into trouble is just assuming that CPI only means top of funnel. It doesn't, as long as you're feeding it the right down funnel signals into the system. So the short answer is we support both, and oftentimes each can be an important component of a brand's user acquisition strategy. Now, what's unique about us is that regardless of how we're getting paid, whether it's on the install or something that happens much further down funnel, our optimization methodology doesn't change. We're still going to center around those down funnel metrics that, again, they've told us are the most meaningful metrics for their business. Now, David, there can be times where one model may provide an advantage versus another for a brand. For example, if someone wants to pay on a CPE or cost per engagement that's really down funnel, and perhaps on average there's a couple of day lag time before a consumer would complete that action, that can be really problematic for media buying teams, right? Because as they're investing to test a new campaign, they need to know if it's working or not. And if those performance metrics are, slower to become measurable for them, a CPI can be an advantage. It can help increase the number of media buying teams or partnerships that want to test a program. And because that performance is visible and more real time, it can make the program scalable more quickly. On the flip of that, if someone's really effective at monetizing a specific in-app event or outcome, they may be able to pay a really competitive CPE rate for that event, in which case that can drive up performance for media buying teams or entice more media buying partners to test a program. So each has its home, and the short answer is both work and both can scale. At Perform CPE, one of our unique differentiators is that we have the data advantage of seeing those results across both models for hundreds of brands.
So you mentioned data there. Now, of course, every marketer has data, but not always clarity around that data. How do you use down funnel signals and broader patterns then to drive more predictable growth?
Yeah, you hit it on the head, right? We hear about data everywhere, and every marketer does have data, but to your point, the clarity can be a much different story because lots of times internal teams, they're looking at that program in isolation, and when you're doing that, it's really hard to know, what signals actually matter and which ones are the best predictors of performance. We kind of sit in the belief that one program can tell you what happened, but when you're looking at hundreds of programs, you're really in a position to be able to tell what's about to happen. And because we operate across hundreds of programs, we can see patterns more quickly. And that breadth of insight really gives us something that a lot of internal teams or brands wouldn't otherwise have, which is context. So we can take that context and we can apply those social learnings to really give us a great blueprint to launch a program. So you have a high confidence starting point. You're not coming into a launch at zero. We already know what audiences, what placements, what partnerships tend to perform best for like-type programs. And then again, because we're ingesting those down funnel signals, as we scale a partnership and get more data specifically from that marketer, performance just gets stronger and stronger. It's a continuous feedback loop. So, we're not replacing internal teams, but we can give them the advantage that they can't otherwise get from looking at a single program. So that combination of kind of cross-program patterns, their own client-provided signals, and the proven launch strategy really allow us to drive that more predictable, scalable revenue that could sometimes be challenging, again, when you're looking at data in isolation for a single program.
Good stuff. So just changing tack for a moment, I'd like to talk about keyword conquest, and if we could. This is becoming a bigger part of user acquisition strategies. So what should marketers expect from a strong keyword conquesting program?
Yeah, no question. It's a growing strategy for many of the brands that we deliver user acquisition for. What's unique about keyword conquesting is it can give marketers something they rarely get with ranking strategies, and that's really a predictable blueprint. There's so many insights and data available to us that now when we're building keyword conquesting proposals, we're able to analyze the entire universe of keywords. That could be primary terms, secondary terms. We can look at what their competitors are doing, and then we're able to model that. So we can come back to a brand and say, all right, here's the competitive landscape. Here's your current rank on specific keywords. Here's what we believe the investment is needed to help you secure the top placement on those keywords. And then we can assess, here's the expected organic lift for achieving the top rank on that keyword. And then importantly for keyword conquesting, because you don't want this to be a quick turn solution that goes away, here's what's needed to continue to maintain that placement. And for the brands that we execute keyword conquesting, especially for those who've been ranked much further down on relevant keywords, they are now winning at that really high intent moment when consumers are searching for that relevant term in the App Store. And the other neat piece about keyword conquesting is that as you start to increase rank on a keyword or multiple keywords, and that has an impact on your category rank, you really start to see that organic lift compounding over time. So for the strategy as a whole, I just think it's one of those really rare opportunities where paid investment can have such a measurable and direct impact to accelerate organic growth for a mobile-focused brand.
Good stuff. Now, something else that's hot at the moment, rewarded environments. Lots of brands are increasing spend in rewarded environments. What would you say is driving that shift, and how have you at Perform CB approached it?
Yeah, rewarded environments can really provide high-performing placements for marketers. And part of that's because of the user experience, right? With most marketing, you're intercepting a consumer when they're doing something else. In some sense, it's an interruption. Whereas with rewarded engagement, consumers are choosing to engage. And just for some context, David, for the first really, nearly 2 decades of our business, we tended to stay away more from rewarded experience, in a sense, because we thought it was kind of counter to our objective of delivering the highest intent, highest quality users. We made a significant investment in reward a couple of years ago. In part, that was a talent acquisition. We saw a great team that we thought was doing wonderful things for brands. But when we looked at the performance of the traffic as well, we could see unbelievable return on ad spend for these brands and high intent consumers that were actually sticking around. So, I think for rewarded to be executed correctly, you've got to make sure that the payable events are happening much further down funnel, because if you've got consumers who are choosing to engage and you're allowing them to interact with an app in a way that can create some stickiness with them, you can really drive some strong intent and better down funnel performance. So we've certainly seen an expansion of rewarded strategies and believe it can be a critical and helpful component to the overall performance marketing mix. From a return on ad spend, like I mentioned, reward oftentimes delivers some of the best metrics that we see across the brands that we power UA for.
It's interesting because I remember many years ago talking to a company that specialized in that space. And I said, well, look, playing devil's advocate, you're just bribing people to look at ads, aren't you? You look at the ad and you'll get this. And they said, well, that's a very cynical way of looking at it. The way we look at it is we couldn't be being more transparent about the value exchange. Here's what we're asking you to do. Here's what you're going to get in return for it. So what you said at the start, that answer really resonated with me.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, the user experience for the rewarded channel is different. On the front end, we also like to give consumers options. So, we've seen some instances where consumers have to engage with a specific app or brand. I think as you give consumers options on the front end and allow them some flexibility in terms of, hey, what program or campaign do I want to interact with? That's also another level of intent that you can help identify on the front end. But yeah, to your point, I think, this has a home. It's great from a transparency standpoint in terms of helping marketers understand, here's kind of the start to finish experience, and here's the anticipated results, and helping them understand why it would be a meaningful portion of their performance mix.
Yeah, great. So let's talk a little bit now about pilot programs. As we know, these can be hit and miss for brands. How do you structure them so that they're worth the time and so that they turn into long-term partnerships?
Yeah, the pilot program has been so exciting for our business over the past couple of years. To your point, a lot of pilots fail, and we see some that are either too small, too short, or maybe most importantly, aren't aligned with the real metrics that matter to the business. So, for a couple of years now, we've continued to redefine our ideal client profile. And as we've got better with our ICP, we're continually asking ourselves, if we know we can super serve a brand and we're the optimal fit for their user acquisition strategies, how can we ensure that we start up that partnership? So we built the framework for our Perform CB funded pilot. And in short, it allows us to provide a brand with free traffic. For many brands, we're giving up to $10,000 worth of free traffic so that they've got a data set that enables them to make smarter decisions going forward in terms of where they want to allocate dollars. In 2025 alone, we ran more than a handful of pilots that resulted in multi-million-dollar partnerships just last year. So we love leaning in here when a prospect meets our ideal client profile. And I would say for anybody who's considering this, there's a couple of factors you have to have in your framework, I believe, to make it successful. One, you have to know on the front end, what are the goals? Like, what are the shared KPIs that we're driving toward? There has to be clarity with the client in regards to when those KPIs are exceeded, what does the upside look like post-pilot? So, when this becomes a paid partnership, what should be the expected scale or appetite in month 1, 2, 3, and beyond? And then you really got to work hand in hand with that team because, again, this is kind of a prove yourself type of pilot. And you want to make sure that you're fully dialed into what matters most for them and are delivering on those results, because once you prove the performance of the pilot, scaling with those brands really does become straightforward. And as I mentioned, we turn that into, several multi-million-dollar partnerships just in the last year alone.
Excellent. Now, there's going to be people from all walks of life and all different industries and companies listening to this. Which verticals are leaning most into performance-based user acquisition right now, and why would you say that is?
Yeah, we see adoption for performance marketing really across all of the categories in the App Store, and we consider ourselves category agnostic, so we have examples across the whole breadth of categories. If we were to shine the spotlight on a few that have been most successful for us, certainly finance over the past several years has been a leading driver. And I think when you consider finance and lifestyle, we're at the turn of the year right now as this is being recorded. So personal finance, credit health are really top of mind, as is health and wellness. And then we also see tremendous growth in brand depth across entertainment and streaming, and e-commerce and shopping. So those are a few of the major categories. And I think, there's a lot that drives that. One, there's great consumer demand for those products, but also those marketers really tend to understand that there is an opportunity here for measurable outcomes and predictable scale. And that's where we've been able to demonstrate social learnings from having run a lot of like-type programs and been able to add considerable depth across marketers for all those verticals.
Excellent. So, Lee, it feels like you covered a lot of ground in not a lot of time. Just sum it all up for us in 30 seconds, if you would, please.
First off, thank you, David. Love the conversation and being able to talk to you. I would say at the end of the day, brands want user acquisition that drives results and scales in a predictable way. And that's where Perform CB can help them. We can tie that acquisition spend directly to the outcomes that matter the most for their business. So for any of your listeners, as they're kind of thinking and talking through user acquisition strategies, trying to, find ways to scale faster, safer, smarter, and at massive scale, we'd certainly be open to talking to them and figuring out how we can help in any way possible.
Good stuff. Well, it's been great to talk to you, Lee. Thank you very much indeed.
Appreciate it, David. Thank you.
So that's all for this chat with Lee Aho from Perform CB on user acquisition strategies. Ladies and gents, hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye.
And that was the episode 258, From Installs to Outcomes in App Growth, featuring an App Talk interview with Lee Aho, Chief Revenue Officer at Perform CB. To listen to more episodes, by now we have more than 250 to check out. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube podcasts. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. We release episodes on Mondays, so subscribe and you will be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.